The world watched in solemn silence as the legendary televangelist Jimmy Swaggart was laid to eternal rest, a man whose voice once echoed through millions of homes across the globe, preaching salvation, singing gospel, and challenging sin, was now being remembered not just as a preacher, but as a husband, a father, and a flawed yet faithful servant of God. The funeral, held at the iconic Family Worship Center in Baton Rouge, was more than just a goodbye. It was a full-circle moment, both majestic and heart-wrenching. Yet among all the music, the prayers, and the sea of dignitaries who came to pay their respects, one moment left the sanctuary breathless. Frances Swaggart, his devoted wife of over 70 years, stepped forward. With trembling hands and tearful eyes, she delivered a eulogy so raw, so stunning, that it pierced every soul in the room. Her words weren't rehearsed. They were lived. What she said next wasn't just a tribute. It was a love letter drenched in grief, soaked in faith, and thunderous in impact. Silence fell. Tears flowed. And the world remembered Jimmy Swaggart, not just for what he preached, but for how deeply he was loved. Jimmy Swaggart, who passed away at the age of 90, was more than just a preacher. He was a symbol of revivalist Christianity in America. From humble beginnings in Faraday, Louisiana, he rose to international fame through his fiery sermons, gospel music, and television ministry. Despite personal and public trials, Swaggart's legacy endured for over 6 decades. His funeral, held at the Family Worship Center in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, where he preached for over 40 years, through thousands of mourners, political leaders, celebrities, gospel artists, and lifelong followers, all gathered to bid farewell to a man who changed the landscape of evangelical broadcasting. As the choir softly sang, "There's room at the cross for you," Frances Swaggart took the stage, dressed in elegant black with a small gold cross pinned over her heart. Standing beside the flag-draped casket of her husband, she took a moment before speaking, her voice trembling not with fear, but with decades of love, memories, and grief. "Jimmy wasn't just a preacher to me," she said. "He was my partner in everything, my protector, my soulmate, the man I prayed with every night for over 70 years. The world saw the sermons and the songs, but I saw the tears he cried behind closed doors for lost souls. I saw the battles he fought in silence, the nights he stayed up reading the Word with trembling hands." Her tribute was raw and deeply moving. Frances described how they first met as teenagers in Louisiana, how he had nothing but a Bible and a dream, and how their journey took them from revival tents to broadcasting in over 100 countries. "People saw the scandals," she added with poise, "but I saw the redemption. I saw a man broken, who let God rebuild him. Stronger, wiser, more humble. That's the man I loved. That's the man we're burying today." Her words were followed by a standing ovation, with many in the crowd visibly crying, including well-known gospel singers and pastors. Even Donnie Swaggart, their son, was seen wiping away tears as he hugged his mother after her speech. The service was a blend of Swaggart's 2 great loves, preaching and music. His favorite hymns, including "I'll Never Be Lonely Again" and "Jesus, Just the Mention of Your Name," were performed by longtime collaborators and artists from the Jimmy Swaggart Ministries. Several televangelists paid tribute, including Franklin Graham and Pastor John Hagee, calling Swaggart a spiritual general who fought until the end. Video clips of his most iconic sermons were played throughout the service, reminding everyone of the passion he carried in every message. As the ceremony neared its end, a solemn hush fell over the Family Worship Center. After hours of tributes, songs, and scripture, it was time for the final goodbye. A moment no sermon could soften, no hymn could ease. The sanctuary, once filled with the echo of worship, now held the weight of farewell. Frances Swaggart, the heartbroken yet dignified widow of the televangelist icon, slowly rose from her front-row seat. Dressed in elegant black, her hand trembled slightly as she clutched a folded handkerchief. But her gaze was unwavering, fixed on the wooden casket that held not just her husband, but her life partner of over 70 years. She walked toward the casket, her footsteps echoing softly in the still sanctuary. Every eye followed her. Every breath seemed to pause. The woman who had stood beside Jimmy Swaggart through scandal, redemption, and revival now stood alone, for the first time in decades. She leaned down, gently kissed the polished surface of the coffin, and whispered with a voice only a few could hear, but many would feel, "I'll see you soon, my love." The moment was shattering. Those words carried the weight of a lifetime. A marriage forged in faith, tested by fire, and anchored in love. A flood of emotion swept over the crowd. You could hear the sniffles, the soft weeping, the quiet gasps. Some bowed their heads in prayer. Others simply wept, their hearts breaking for the woman who had just said goodbye to her anchor, her husband, her pastor. Tears streamed down the faces of family members seated behind her. Donnie Swaggart, their only son and fellow minister, bowed his head, covering his face with one hand. His wife Debbie reached out and held his other hand tightly, as if trying to hold both his pain and her own. Their children, Jimmy's grandchildren, watched with tear-stained cheeks, some silently mouthing prayers. And then, in a touching and symbolic gesture, Jimmy Swaggart's oldest grandson, Gabriel Swaggart, approached the casket with a worn red-letter King James Bible in his hands. The leather was cracked from use, the gold-edged pages softened by time. This wasn't just any Bible. It was the one Jimmy had preached from for decades, the same one he held during televised crusades, fiery revivals, and countless sermons that reached millions across the globe. Gabriel placed the Bible gently on top of the casket. His hands lingered there for a moment as if reluctant to let go. He closed his eyes and whispered a prayer only God could hear. Some said later they could feel the spirit of reverence sweep through the room like a soft breeze. Others said the silence itself felt sacred. Then, with great care, pallbearers stepped forward, Donnie Swaggart, Gabriel, and other family members, and longtime ministry colleagues. Their faces were solemn as they took their places at the casket. Together, they lifted the man who had once lifted millions with his words, carrying him down the aisle one final time. As they began their walk, the organ began to play softly, its notes familiar and deeply emotional. The hymn was "When We All Get to Heaven," a favorite of Jimmy's and one he had often closed services with. The congregation stood, and many began to sing along, their voices cracked with emotion. When we all get to heaven, what a day of rejoicing that will be. It wasn't just a song anymore, it was a promise. As the casket moved slowly through the aisle, camera flashes from the press captured the moment. But even the cameras seemed to respect the silence. Ushers guided mourners to bow their heads as Jimmy made his last journey through the church he built, the ministry he led, and the family he loved. Outside, the hearse waited, surrounded by a sea of white roses and hundreds of mourners who couldn't fit inside. A private burial service was scheduled to follow at a nearby cemetery, where Jimmy would be laid to rest beneath a simple headstone marked with a cross and the words, "Well done, thou good and faithful servant." But in that sanctuary, during those final moments, it didn't matter how many sermons he preached or how many gospel albums he recorded. It didn't matter how many controversies he overcame or how many nations he reached. What mattered was that he was loved, deeply, fiercely, and faithfully. His wife's final whisper, his grandson's sacred gesture, the tears of his family, the collective mourning of thousands, all bore witness to a man who, though imperfect, gave his all to God, to ministry, and to those he served. As the last notes of the organ faded into silence, and the casket disappeared through the sanctuary doors, a quiet voice among the crowd was overheard saying, "He's not gone. He's just gone home." Jimmy Swaggart's journey was far from perfect, but his influence remains undeniable. A man marked by triumphs and trials, he emerged as one of the most prominent voices in American evangelicalism, bringing millions to Christ through his preaching, gospel music, and relentless missionary zeal. Even amid controversy, his unwavering commitment to the message of redemption never wavered. Swaggart's ministry was not confined to a pulpit. It was broadcast into living rooms across the globe. Through his flagship program, the Jimmy Swaggart Telecast, he reached audiences in over 100 countries. Whether in bustling cities or remote villages, people tuned in to hear his powerful sermons and spirit-filled music. For many, he was a spiritual father, a source of comfort, conviction, and hope. His musical legacy is equally profound. With more than 50 gospel albums and hymns that became worship staples, Jimmy Swaggart's voice was a beacon of inspiration. Songs like "There is a River" and "Jesus, Just the Mention of Your Name" carried not just melody, but ministry. His piano playing, infused with Southern soul and Pentecostal fire, brought worship alive in a way that few others could replicate. Swaggart's most enduring institutional legacy remains the Family Worship Center in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. The church, which seats thousands, became a spiritual home for believers from every walk of life. Week after week, people gathered there in person and online to hear the gospel preached with authority and authenticity. And at the heart of it all stood Jimmy, passionate, fiery, and deeply committed to his calling. He also established Jimmy Swaggart Bible College, now JSBC, a training ground for future pastors, evangelists, and worship leaders. Many of today's ministry leaders were mentored through his teachings, carrying his legacy of uncompromising truth and heartfelt worship into the next generation. But as grand as these accomplishments are, perhaps the most stunning and lasting testimony came not from a pulpit or broadcast, but from the loving tribute of a wife who stood by him through every mountain and valley. Frances Swaggart's eulogy during the funeral service wasn't just a collection of fond memories. It was a declaration of enduring faith, loyalty, and love. It captured the essence of Jimmy Swaggart's life in ways no biography ever could. She didn't shy away from the hard parts. She acknowledged the battles, the brokenness, and the humanity of the man behind the ministry. But she also highlighted his repentance, resilience, and rededication to the calling he never abandoned. Her words were both raw and regal, a mix of grief and grace, sorrow and strength. "The world saw the preacher," she said, voice trembling, "but I saw the man who prayed on his knees when no one was watching, the man who wept for strangers, the man who never stopped believing that God still had a plan for him." Those words echoed far beyond the walls of the Family Worship Center. They spread across social media, replayed on news broadcasts, and were quoted in countless trivia articles. People who had drifted from the church tuned in once more, not just to honor a preacher, but to witness the power of love that survives even death. In that moment, Frances Swaggart reminded the world of something powerful. Behind every great man is often a greater woman. Her faithfulness mirrored his message. Her loyalty, a reflection of God's grace that Jimmy preached about for decades. It's no exaggeration to say that the strength and longevity of Jimmy Swaggart's ministry owes much to the woman who never left his side, even when the spotlight dimmed and the critics grew loud. Today, the Swaggart legacy continues through the ministry team he built, including his son Dunny and grandson Gabriel. Together, they carry the torch forward, preaching, teaching, and leading worship in the very sanctuary Jimmy helped build. His sermons live on through digital archives. His songs are still sung in churches worldwide. And his story, both its heights and its valleys, serves as a testimony to the enduring grace of God. Countless lives have been touched by his ministry. The addict who found freedom, the pastor who found his calling, the widow who found hope through a Sunday broadcast. These are the unseen fruits of a life poured out for the gospel. As the world says goodbye to Jimmy Swaggart, it also bears witness to a legacy that refuses to fade. His voice may be silent, but his message still echoes. His body may rest in the earth, but his spirit continues through the lives changed, the hymns sung, and the gospel proclaimed. He was flawed. He was redeemed. He was relentless. And in the end, He was faithful. Rest in peace, Reverend Jimmy Swaggart. Your voice may be silent, but your message echoes on.